Okay, hello everyone. So today we're going to talk about the ADHD Panorama documentary that was recently filmed on diagnosis, overdiagnosis, and we're also going to address the follow-up in the neurodiversity community to that Panorama feature. I'm joined by three of my colleagues today, all with different experiences and working on different elements at exceptional individuals, because I want to get their opinions on this subject as well. I'm going to start off with just in order on my screen. So Ruth, could you just tell us who you are, what you do, and give us a bit of background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of the delivery leads at Exceptional Individuals, and I also the Chief Innovation Officer. So basically, I deliver assessments, workplace needs assessments. I also provide coaching to our clients and also deliver some training on awareness and acceptance and advancements to organizations. And I also come up with some of the strategy around some of our services and solutions that help to build a better neuro-inclusive workplace. What else do you need from me?
Well, you work with people with ADHD every single day pretty much, right? And you've got experience of ADHD yourself. Can you give us a bit of background about your ADHD?
So my background is more so where I've worked with many people that have ADHD, so coached them on a regular basis, given them great strategies for them to implement, feel seen and heard, that have worked really well for them. And I've done it for like 10, 15 years on and off. I'm also got traits of ADHD where I definitely have the traits that when the clients speak to me, it's like they're telling my story again and again. So it can be triggering in some instances because it's like, I do that as well. And so I have to be very conscious of not doing that too much. But it does help to build that relatability as well with them too.
Thank you, Ruth. We'll come back to that shortly. So we're also joined by Lizzie. Lizzie joined the team a few months ago. And one of the things we have at Exceptional Individuals is we have characteristics quizzes online. And when we put them online, I was very conscious that we made sure people were fully aware that it wasn't a diagnosis, but there was such a demand from people asking questions about whether they had ADHD. I felt like we needed something on the site, and it was important that people could go and use this resource just to give them an indication if they had any of those characteristics. Now, Lizzie's been working in particularly on our autism quiz. And one of the things that I've asked for her to look at is making sure people are fully aware that it is not a diagnosis and just a characteristics quiz. Lizzie, having come into the space recently, can you just give us a bit of background about who you are and how you have perceived and a reaction to the amount of people that are actually doing these quizzes on a daily basis, and whether you feel like there's a need for them or not?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I'm Lizzie. I recently joined Exceptional Individuals, and I've been focusing kind of on project development and how we can improve our services across the site. In particular, I've been looking at the quizzes that we offer, specifically the autism quizzes, because that's where we get a lot of traffic through our website, but also we get a lot of traffic through our ADHD quiz. We found that a lot of people use them and often contact us about how they feel they should interpret the quizzes. So for me, it's really important that we make that as clear as possible. And yeah, we've recently put in new steps to ensure that everyone understands that it's not a diagnosis, which I think going into a quiz, you can often have a little bit of bias, kind of looking for different traits that you might relate to. So knowing that it's really clear at the end about how people might be able to interpret that part of the quiz is important to us, because we don't want to be offering diagnosis. But yeah, I'm learning a lot about this. This is a really new area for me, and ever since we started talking about it, I feel like I see the conversation everywhere online. When I'm walking past people are talking about ADHD. So yeah, it's really interesting to me.
Thank you, Lizzie. And last on my screen, but by no means least, we've got Kinga joining us. Kinga is our head of operations, works with a lot of our colleagues and managers colleagues as well that have different traits, different neurodivergences. Kinga's neurodiverse herself, but Kinga often is working with making sure individuals are getting support in the workplace for their ADHD. Kinga, can you just give us an intro to who you are and some of the traits you see with individuals with ADHD that are going through the support application process?
Sure. So my name is Kinga. I'm the head of operations. I'm neurodiverse myself. I've been diagnosed with dyslexia, and very recently, I'm 90% sure I'm also autistic. So that's the beginning of my journey through self-diagnosis and going through NHS and maybe privately. Regarding the ADHD candidates we support, our workplace needs assessments are very holistic. So they cover different and each part of what we do at work and how we may struggle. And those assessments can really clearly point out people may struggle with time management, organization skills, planning. So these are the most, I think, popular struggles for people who have ADHD. And then we guide them on how to improve, how to overcome those challenges, to really not be focused on why I'm challenging, but I know why. So now let's do this in order to overcome, and let's be more confident and comfortable in what I do.
Thank you, Kinga. Okay, that's given us a really good introduction to everyone. One of the reasons I feel like ADHD can often be overdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed is because of those characteristics, and so many people can relate to those characteristics. The office space I work in Brighton, I have people regularly coming up to me and saying, I think I have ADHD. I've seen a TikTok video, I've done a traits test online, and I've got a lot of the characteristics. Now, for me, I have to kind of just put a pause to that and talk to them in a bit more detail about the different kinds of ADHD, the combination, the hyperactivity element, and everything around that. And I think ADHD is one of those neurodivergences that it seems like a lot of people think they have. Now, Ruth, I'm going to come to you first. What is your feelings on the Panorama piece that came out? What was your reaction to it? And also, how do you feel, as someone that hasn't been officially diagnosed with ADHD, the importance of having access to those diagnoses that are affordable, are available to individuals?
Okay, I'm going to have to probably get you to break down that question when I finish answering some of it. But yeah, so I guess my initial reaction was that it must be individuals in a privileged place to even get a diagnosis. I find that many of the people we support don't even have that. And the ones that do have that, they have it later on in life when they're adults and they feel like they've lost so much. So I guess my initial reaction was, that's great that that person was able to go through that journey and get told by the GP, and the GP actually respected them enough to even do the whole test with them, a diagnostic assessment with them. Because the last time I went to my GP, and they laughed me out of their office telling me, you have to wait 5 years, don't be ridiculous. And it was those words and even harsher. So I think we've got to be very conscious about everyone's experience is going to be completely different. But that was my initial response. And secondly, I guess the overdiagnosis piece of, well, these private firms said actually he is. It's not surprising. I think, unfortunately, that with the wait list not having the physicians and support in place, whether these organizations are legit or not comes up because, unfortunately, the demand is high. And when we went through the pandemic, there was a massive rise in people actually realizing, I'm not masking anymore. I'm not having to do all of these things that make me feel like I'm neurotypical or have neurotypical traits. So yeah, there's a lot of things came up, lots of things around privilege, lots of things about intersectionality in terms of the fact that other people can go and get asked for a diagnosis and not get laughed out of the office, and other people can kind of have that assumption that actually it's very black and white. And it actually goes beyond the diagnosis. It's not about the diagnosis. It's actually about what the person has challenges with, what their great strengths are, and what we can do to support them. That should be the main focus. And the diagnosed or not diagnosed discussion isn't really helpful, because in this space, it becomes this badge of honor, and it almost becomes a club, like you can only come in if you've got a diagnosis, and that isn't right.
Thanks, Ruth. And just for people that may not be aware, you use the phrase masking there.
Yeah.
Can you just explain what that is?
In the simplest terms, hopefully I can explain the simplest terms. It's just changing who you are in spaces in order to feel accepted and in order to feel like you can belong in those spaces. So where you might stim or fidget, or you might get anxious in certain places, you would pretend to be somebody else, somebody you're not, in order to fit in with the rest of the group. And if you do that for very long, it becomes maladaptive, as in very unhelpful. People then tend to burn out because it's almost like performing. So masking it in the simplest terms is basically not showing up as yourself, hoping to be accepted as somebody else, but never showing them your true self.
And I think that's particularly prevalent in ADHD, and especially, research shows in females as well, especially through their schooling years. Kinga, as someone who's working and supporting individuals with ADHD on a daily basis, your chance to kind of look at the BBC Panorama feature, how did you feel about it afterwards? And also someone going through this kind of self-diagnosis of autism as well. What was your initial reaction?
So my first reaction was I was shocked when I saw this footage of private assessments, how they conducted the assessment. So that was a very big red flag for me. But at the same time, I definitely agree with Ruth-Ellen that having at least 5 years waiting time on an NHS for support, it's too much. So people would go privately, and because also the notion of self-diagnosis is not fully accepted by others. I think when that is more covered and when that is more protected by it's of course self-diagnosis is as important as professional diagnosis, then I think people would be more confident in talking about that, and actually be more confident, and that hey, I'm autistic or I have ADHD, and that's what are my traits. So yes, it brought lots of different thoughts, this documentary. I think what was missing is that there are also different private practice that offer private assessments, and they are as good as NHS ones. So I think that was missing. And also what was missing is to understand fully how the assessment should look like. The assessment should cover your story. So it's not about tick box exercise, but just to listen to your story of your life and what you went through, and then go from there. So I think being aware that your story is the most important story, I think wasn't that highlighted in the program as I think it should.
Yeah, and I guess I'd put this question to Lizzie on a follow-up from that. And we've made it quite clear our tests online, our quizzes are not diagnoses. But what do you feel like seeing the quantity of people doing them, Lizzie, do you feel, and you can be completely open and honest here, as if they should be accessible and should be available to the public, knowing how hard it is to get official diagnosis? Or do you think, and some of my colleagues sit in this side, that they shouldn't be available and actually removed? Do you have an idea of which one you would lean towards, or do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think given the amount of content I see around ADHD and ADHD traits, ADHD diagnosis on the daily on social media, specifically TikTok, there's a lot of content creators that talk about it. For me, I feel more comfortable with us providing guidance, us providing quizzes about traits of ADHD than, say, maybe a content creator that could potentially provide like the wrong kind of information or misleading information. I think if people are looking for that, I would be happy knowing that it's come from somewhere where we've thoroughly researched it and we feel comfortable like disseminating that information. It's a tricky one really, because I think it's definitely on the rise, and even from that small panorama, there's been like a huge spike in people looking at ADHD diagnosis. I saw that if you look, do you guys know about the right to choose? It's something I discovered the other day, about how with the NHS you have the right to choose about to be referred to a private clinic. That when I was having a look at that, a lot of the services are now saying that we are over capacity, and that's actually happened since this panorama has come out. So I think having other things available for people whilst they're kind of looking at considering getting a diagnosis is really important. So yeah, I think the quizzes can be really useful, as long as we like carefully signpost them and carefully ensure that they understand it's not a diagnosis. I'm all for the quizzes.
Fantastic. And one thing that is making me think, you saying that, and that more and more people are being diagnosed. Since Exceptional Individuals was formed, I was always very conscious about promoting the strengths of neurodiversity, the strengths of ADHD. But is there a danger now we're moving into a territory where it's becoming fashionable to say you have ADHD, as opposed to an awareness of what ADHD is, both the challenges and the strengths, but that it shouldn't be a hindrance? Is it moving towards a place of it's actually quite a cool label to have? I open this question to everyone, so whoever wants to answer first.
I mean, yeah, any label can be cool, but I think for me, the importance is, I don't care if you've got ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. I want to get to know you and your strengths, and how can I support you in a best way for you. I think that's more important than to know that, oh, I've got ADHD, because ADHD is different for every person. No one has the same ADHD or autism or dyslexia. So I'm not a person who are on any social media, so I don't know if the ADHD became a label, probably. But from my perspective, I don't really care, because what I care is about the person, and I just want to hear your story instead of hearing the labels.
Yeah, excellently put. Ruth, Lizzie, anything to add on the fashionableness of having a label?
It's a dangerous, slippery slope, that, I guess that question in itself. But I guess when I first hear that, I know the people that we support on a regular basis that generally find it challenging to do certain tasks, but also have forgotten their strengths and what they're really good at. They would never be like, okay, this is my badge and this is cool, this is a cool thing to have. It's more like, this is part of an element of them. But yeah, you could always take something and turn it into, spin it, right? Quite politically if you want to. But generally I feel that it's more so around people really identifying what they need support with and wanting to move forward. Most people haven't got the time to be like, hey, look at me, I've got ADHD. They're like, actually, I need support. This is what the world needs to do to change. This is how people accept me. And this is how we break the stigma, so that people don't try to hire me just because of my strengths and let me burn out. So there's so many waves of movements that are all about, let me help you to see what ADHD is really like, or neurodivergence in general. Because generally, I think stats are, if you are dyslexic, 50% chance of you having ADHD. So you're not just going to have one neurodivergence that's co-occurring with other things. The main point is, I don't think it's around that label. It's more so around belonging. People want to feel like they belong to something, like they're included in the conversation, like their voice is heard. And oftentimes I don't get that in there every day. So that's probably where that part comes from.
Yeah. And I think one thing we've been really exploring recently is, as a movement, neurodiversity, neurodivergence, we're putting more than 4 different communities together: autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and it's a new movement, and we're still finding our voice as a group and what that narrative is. And the ADHD community may have a very different approach and voice than the autism community, and that's something we're really working on. So I think it's quite important that we do consider that with the outcome of what this Panorama piece has done. One thing that I don't want anyone watching to go away from after this is to go around diagnosing people and saying to colleagues, oh, I watched this piece online and I think you're a bit ADHD. And we say that all the time, especially with ADHD when we're delivering workshops and webinars, because that's the last thing we want to happen. We want to leave this to the experts, the professionals to do. We're gonna call it quits now, but is there any closing thoughts, or actually can I ask you for your closing thoughts, Ruth, Lizzie, Kinga, on what you've seen over the last week and the reaction to it? What would your advice be to our community or to someone thinking that they have the traits as an ADHD individual? What would your advice be to either getting a diagnosis or having a conversation with someone? Is there any top tips from yourself?
Just building on kind of what Ruth and Kinga have already said about with the diagnosis and the traits. I think it's, for me, I feel like it's more like considering how these traits actually affect you and what we can do about it and how we can support people rather than the specific diagnosis. So I think even when people get a diagnosis, like the first thing I think is, okay, now what? Now what can we do to help you? So yeah, I feel like for me, it feels less about the diagnosis and more about, okay, how can we interpret how you're feeling? How can we support you? What are these traits and how are they affecting your life? So just thinking about it maybe a little bit more holistically is in my main thoughts on it.
Yeah, love that, Lizzie. Kinga?
I would recommend, yeah, so there are lots of stories online that you can actually read people's stories, how they've been diagnosed in late life, in their 50s, 40s with autism, ADHD, any type of neurodivergence. And I think just hearing people's stories can help you to see, oh, that resonates with me, or maybe, oh, not really, and then go from there. I think that's what I'm doing at the moment, reading lots of stories of women in their 30s, 40s, 50s who discovering that they are autistic, and they are very powerful, and they give me lots to think and re-investigate my life and all my past. So it's lots of going on in my head, but it's very positive, very enlightening.
I think so, and I think that's something we see all the time, right? Is the older generation, people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who are now exploring this topic of diagnosis, or whether they have a neurodivergence, whether they get diagnosed or not. It can be quite a traumatic experience in some ways. It's almost like a coming out and things making sense all of a sudden. And you touched on that intersectionality piece as well there, which leads nicely onto Ruth with our closing statement. What are your feelings on it, Ruth?
No pressure. So there's quite a few things in terms of tips, but I guess it's having that safe space, person you can speak to around your concerns, somebody that you feel is going to listen to you and hear you and not judge you based on what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, and validating that, because oftentimes we feel invalidated about our experiences and how we feel. So first of all, having somebody like that. The second thing is remembering who you are, like your strengths, like what you're good at, and maybe grabbing a journal that you're okay messing up. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, just to like reflect on things that you're really good at, things that you just kind of celebrate yourself with, because oftentimes we forget that with all the leading up to a diagnosis, should I get diagnosed question, we kind of can lose ourselves. So remembering who you are, fundamentally who you are trying to be in this world and what type of impact you're trying to create in this world and leave with this world, your purpose. Having that journal, that book that reminds you of it, you can open up at any time, will help you remember that, because fundamentally you are a human being that deserves the great things in life. And if you forget that, then sometimes it just becomes a bit harder. You don't want that for yourself.
Amazing. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Kinga.
And what's your comment, man?
Well, I'm the facilitator, so I'm keeping neutral. I think the fact we're having the discussion is really important. And I think one thing I wanted to get across today was that there's not just one voice for the whole community, and people do have different views, different opinions. Some people are absolutely delighted that they were diagnosed and it's been a life-changing experience for them. Other people don't need that diagnosis, but are very aware that they are and do have ADHD, even though it doesn't officially say it on a piece of paper. And I think going back to what you were saying, Kinga, it's about the story of the individual. It's about how they deal with situations. And I mean, we're focused on the workplace. So how do they overcome those challenges in the workplace? What resources and things can they have to themselves to empower themselves? And I think that's the most important bit. Obviously, we don't want these dodgy diagnoses going around because they can be life-changing. But for us, it's just about giving individuals the resources and the tools to empower themselves and having these type of discussions to make people aware that there is more than one narrative in the space and in our team, right? There's different opinions in the team. Some of my colleagues didn't want to be a part of this conversation, and that's to no fault or detriment to them. It's just how we as individuals feel, and that's the most important thing, I think, in this whole discussion. But yes, thank you everyone. We'll put up some resources that you can follow up with this, and any feedback or comments, we're open to them. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.